Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Erin Walsh, and I'm the Director of Enrollment at Thomas Jefferson School. I want to briefly introduce my colleagues. They'll have the opportunity to reintroduce themselves and share more about themselves in a few moments. But we have on this call Dr. Beth Heumann, our middle school coordinator, Mrs. Jane Roth, our Director of Academics, and Dr. Matthew Troutman, our head of school. We're all colleagues at Thomas Jefferson School, and we're here today and under a set of unusual circumstances to talk about something that is really incredibly timely. So fostering independence and resilience in high ability tweens and teens in a digital learning environment. We're going to talk a little bit today about who we are as a school. Who is Thomas Jefferson? We're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by when we say high ability learners. Who are those learners and how are they wired differently? We're also going to talk about our current circumstances. What are we all facing as educators and as parents, and what is being demanded of us in the surrounding circumstances? We're going to talk about, from the parent perspective, how you can encourage self-advocacy, how you can kind of take off remove yourself from behind the driver's seat and encourage your child to slide over and advocate for themselves in a digital learning environment. And then lastly, when will any of this feel easier? I know it's a question out there for a number of us. I'm going to introduce and turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Troutman. Just as a quick programming note, we plan to walk you through this particular presentation for about 30 minutes. We have allotted about 15 minutes at the conclusion of the presentation for Q&A. So if you want to drop any questions in the chat, I will be monitoring those as we go forward if there's something that's really on your mind, but we will be reserving that time at the end to address your questions. So without further ado, Dr. Troutman.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Troutman, head of Thomas Jefferson School. Just a little bit about me. My background is in astrophysics. We are not here to talk about planet formation or stars as much as I would love to do that. I joined Thomas Jefferson School in 2011 as a math teacher. And as of July this year, which was perfect timing for our current environment, I was appointed as a head of school. So I've been head for about a little over a month now, in quite interesting times. If I could talk a little bit about Thomas Jefferson School, the one thing that we need to know is that we are a small school. We have a very low student to teacher ratio, which means we are very flexible. Our students tend to be very high achieving students who love to learn and love to be in a place where we can talk about knowledge. TJ is a special place where we truly get to know every child. I feel that we push them beyond what they might think possible, what parents might think possible, and oftentimes what we even think possible. And that comes from our strong community and our focus on academics. Due to our size, we're often said to be the best school you might not have heard about, but we are incredibly proud of the academics that we achieve. And at TJ, we view our job as creating independent learners. We intentionally build the opportunity for growth, for supportive failure, because that's an important part of learning, and for recovery. And we want to give you some strategies to help your children become independent learners and thinkers next year, given all that we know or don't know about the upcoming environment. And I have two of my colleagues here that I want to introduce. First, you'll hear from Mrs. Jane Roth, who's our Director of Academics, and Dr. Beth Heumann, who's our middle school coordinator. Mrs. Roth.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Roth, TJ's Director of Academics. I also teach Latin to the 7th graders and AP English Language and Composition to the seniors. So I get the students coming and going. I think in my 25 years in the classroom here, I have taught every grade level, and I really value being able to to see and appreciate the process of the Jello setting over the 6 years that the students are with us in the program. I am also a TJ graduate and a TJ mom. My oldest daughter graduated in 2017, and she's beginning her senior year in college now. Our middle daughter will be a senior here at Thomas Jefferson in the fall, and we have a fourth grader attending a local independent day school as well. So Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth Heumann. I am TJ's middle school coordinator. And part of my responsibility there is building structures to help students learn how to learn independently. I teach English, social studies, and Latin grades 7 through 12. Like Jane, in my time at TJ, I think I've taught people in every grade. I'm a parent also to 3 children. Mine are elementary school aged, grades K through 5. So I, like you, spent the spring navigating competing work and school schedules to, I hope, good effect.
All right, so you were likely drawn to this presentation, not just because it centers around the challenges we will all face again with the likelihood of remote learning this fall, but because you probably have a high ability child in your own house. These kids are wired differently in terms of how they need to learn and what motivates them to learn, but also in terms of their social emotional maturity and their behavioral expression. So we're going to step through each of these 3 categories and highlight some of the traits within those categories. So we invite you to use the reactions feature in your Zoom tools, thumbs up or applause, as you recognize your own child, perhaps in some of these traits we're going to describe. Just gonna flip through, Erin. So on the cognitive and creative side, these are kids whose intellectual curiosity is endless. They love a good rabbit hole. They tend to be voracious readers with impressive vocabularies. They need experiences that offer the kind of depth and abstraction and complexity that allow higher level thinking and the development of critical thinking skills. They love to solve problems and apply what they've learned, especially to real world applications. And they tend to have a range of interests and abilities. Often these talents may be in more than one domain. They may have interests outside of schoolwork, for example, where they're engaging in complex reasoning. In my house right now, that looks like an obsession with Greek mythology. It's important to note too that because they can have talents in different domains, they may lack talents in other domains, and this can cause them to deal with some frustration because they are used to feeling things come easily in some areas, and then they experience frustration when they might not have that same facility in other areas. On the social emotional side, these are kids who feel comfortable around older people, whether that's older teenagers, right? We see 7th graders here at Thomas Jefferson feeling, very excited, sitting around the lunch table with juniors and seniors and talking about, shared interests, which is pretty cool. But because their cognitive development is advanced, they tend to seek out conversations with older folks. These are kids who experience the world with an incredible intensity of emotion because of the asynchronous development between the cognitive side and the social emotional social emotional side. So for example, we know that in this population of young people, these high ability young people, levels of anxiety are simply higher. So that's something that we as educators and certainly as parents have to be sensitive to and know how to deal with. These are little idealists. They have a strong sense of right and wrong, interested in fairness and justice, and will fight tooth and nail for those sorts of things. They also struggle in a really real way with perfectionism. The sense, as I mentioned before, they may have skills in one domain, but not in another. And the sense that they're perfect in one area can lead them to believe that they should be equally talented in other subject areas too. And it can be paralyzing when they're not, because let's face it, perfection is not, in fact, real. And finally, on the behavioral side, we talked about perfectionism, but underachievement is the other classic tendency that can actually grow out of perfectionism. Like, both are frustrating for these kids to experience. Perfection often manifests itself in underachievement in a high ability child because, well, if you don't try, you can't fail. It can also just come from boredom and a need for more challenge too. And sometimes you have to suss out what is behind those behaviors. These kids are endlessly curious and endlessly talkative. And any of us who have been trapped in a house since March with one of these little beings, I think have experienced this in a way that we may not be used to, because they don't have those outlets with friends to talk about the obsession with Percy Jackson or whatever. Finally, they need to challenge, and this is different from the need for challenge. This is the need to be seen as an intellectual force to be reckoned with, and these behaviors can really get to parents and teachers. These bright kids know what they know. They have strong opinions, and again, because that social emotional maturity generally lags behind the cognitive development, they can lack the shall we say finesse in expressing these strong opinions that they have. So that's kind of just a quick and dirty, high level march through many of the traits that we see in these students. And I'm going to hand it over to Beth to shift gears and talk about what we're looking at in terms of the educational environments, the learning environments that we might be facing this fall.
So you may be thinking, what does all this mean for your particular brand of kid and for you as we look to start school in the middle of this public health crisis? So all parents are struggling right now, but as the parent of a high ability child, you have a particular kind of struggle ahead that we really hope that we can help you with. Current circumstances, of course, are going to dictate what is possible, and we may well find ourselves moving through these three modalities, online, hybrid, and in-person, over the course of a school year. None of us, that is teachers and students alike, none of us can pretend that instruction or learning look the same in these three different environments. We do know that most local districts and many independent schools are opting to go virtual for the first part of the year, while case numbers are increasing in St. Louis. So we're going to focus in this on strategies for remote learning, many of which can also be applied to hybrid situations. So I want us to take a moment and share in chat how remote instruction is different. One thing that your family encountered as you moved into remote instruction last spring. You guys could.
Don't be shy. Feel free to
See,
share. There we go.
difficulty with scheduling was
Yep.
one, certainly. Being able to time management and
How quickly a student finished their work. Time challenges from diving in depth into larger projects.
Peer interactions and scheduling, those were big ones.
Mm-hmm.
inability to focus. Yeah.
Multiple kids with different needs.
Boredom.
Mm.
Oh, physical exercise. That's a good one too.
Overall technology challenges, applications not working well, having time to review the assignment, helping out as a parent. These are lots of good responses, and yes, certainly we've encountered a lot of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
These are great.
Rushing through. Yep. Oh, right. Having more people, more schedules to maintain, and all that busyness in a household. These are great. All right, well, let's forge ahead. So what can we expect? In some ways, more of the same, but perhaps we've all learned from this as well. So having been through this experience once, let's normalize right now that nothing we're facing will be as easy as in-person school would have been, and let's reality check some expectations. Even in-person instruction, which I think we all consider the best possible scenario, that would look different this year too, should circumstances allow us to get back there. We know that our kids will encounter frustrations and misunderstandings. We know that teenagers have kind of half-cooked organizational systems at best, that they still need help, that they sometimes resist that help. And we know that all of those things, especially for high ability kids, lead to greater levels of anxiety. And it also leads to greater level of anxiety for us parents as we're helping them through this. So let's take a look at each of these categories a little more closely to get a good handle on what we're dealing with.
So though we can foresee them, we can't predict them. And we know there are going to be technology issues. You may be sharing devices. You may have connectivity issues when 5 people in your household all have to be on a Zoom call and the internet decides that it would prefer not to. You may end up with some time delays in communication where your student might have asked a question in class somehow ends up being a 24-hour turnaround. There may be communication misunderstandings. Students are going to have to learn some etiquette for communication, to ask for help in ways that elicits the help that they want. And there may also be pacing issues. They may be moving too fast, too slow, and those sorts of things are going to be things that we will absolutely encounter.
So we're going to be dealing with a modality that requires really good reading comprehension, interpretation, and communication skills. There will be a lot more written instruction to process, with less opportunity to ask for clarification on those instructions in the moment. Resisting the urge to forge ahead. Someone in chat alluded to this. High ability kids have this tendency to dive in and assume they understand the instructions because they are so smart, but sometimes they're not reading closely, and they go off down the wrong path. It also, this modality also demands that students understand where to find information, how to interpret the information they find, how to relate that information to larger course goals, and how to synthesize everything. So those are all challenges related to how they understand based on somebody else's communication, but also how they then communicate in turn.
This is also going to require some organizational skills. Lots of our students are used to following the crowd somewhat. A bell rings and they go with the people they're supposed to go with, and they end up in the class they're supposed to be in. But at home, they have to know where they need to be, and they need to know when they need to be there, and they have to build structures to get themselves there. They also need to break down assignments, particularly in some asynchronous systems. Students get given sort of larger chunks of work to do. And so coming up with individual schedules to get it done to work around their family schedule can be a challenge. They also have to order physical space. The school home division can be very helpful, but it's somewhat difficult when it's all being done in your bedroom. So figuring out how to create a space that is school is going to be a challenge. High ability learners also, they have the tendency to be self-directed and motivated when they're interested in the material or see the application. So creating that motivation and directing it at school is one of the things we're going to be facing.
Right, as I mentioned before, this particular set of challenges applies to both students and parents. We are all going to be feeling anxious and as we navigate what's ahead. Unfamiliarity with this mode of learning. It's not something that we as adults ever experienced. Our kids have limited experience with it. Many schools are changing up the tools that they were relying on last spring. And we may not be as familiar with those tools either. We all have a desire for control in the midst of chaos. But chaos aside, this desire for control is also a fundamental tension between children, especially teenagers and parents. They need help, but they don't always want to ask. We want to help, but we also want them to be independent. And so sometimes figuring out how best to help is something that we wrestle with.
So if we know that these are the challenges that our kids are going to encounter, we want to think about what the skills are that they need to handle those challenges. And more importantly for our purpose here today, how do we as parents guide our kids in building those skills? Can we flip over? Yeah. So it's sort of seems somewhat counterintuitive, but the way to raise children who can fix their own problems is to ask them questions instead of giving them solutions. So one of the things that we've done here is created a handful of situations that illustrate what it might look like when a child is encountering the challenges we anticipated, along with what a reactive response might look like. That is, when we go with our instinct to fix, versus what a constructive response might look like. One where we guide our child toward greater resilience and personal responsibility. And to use a somewhat touchy in the moment metaphor perhaps, we're used to treating behaviors as a disease, but really we need to treat behaviors as a symptom, figure out what the root causes are, and approach them, not try to play whack-a-mole with the symptoms on a daily basis.
So to provide a concrete example, let's say you encounter your child breaking down at a kitchen table over a math grade. Now, your parent reaction is to fix it, but really we want to look at those. This is the symptom. So what could be the cause? It could be academic independence, not understanding the material. It could be social emotional resilience. It could be stress. It could be perfectionism. It could be not knowing what to ask or how to ask it of the teacher. And again, the impulse is to fix it. So Beth, what should we do?
Well, have I got a solution for you? The situation clearly triggers our desire to help and can make us want to do everything from hugging our child and telling them that calculus isn't real and it can't hurt them, to creating schedules to make sure they're completing their work, to frantically emailing the teacher. We see our kids suffering and we want to make it better. But we need to sit on our desires to fix everything and ask them questions and really listen to the answers. What happened sort of puts it on them. It doesn't really help. It's too wide open. Questions like, what's making you feel that way? What do you think you could do? And then following up, right? So thinking about asking, listening, clarifying, and really help them reflect on their experience going forward. That's the way to build the resilience that we're looking for. It's also important to note right now that high achieving students, when they're faced with not knowing something, it's often that the giftedness feels like a piece of their identity. And sometimes they're measuring themselves against peers. You know, I didn't do well on this quiz, but neither did my friend who I think is more or less, on my level. So maybe it's the quiz's problem, not mine. So one thing for us as parents to be aware of is that when they aren't getting that peer-to-peer interaction, it can leave them feeling really adrift. But it gives us an opportunity to help build internal rather than external motivation, and to really see risk-taking and mistakes as an accepted part of learning, just a way that things are going to be instead of a failure.
That's such an important point. If we look at another scenario, missing assignments and class meetings, you hear from a teacher that your child hasn't turned in homework assignments or maybe missed a virtual session. Well, again, these are the symptoms, and we want to find the root cause. Is it fear of failure? Is it not wanting to show up to be judged and see themselves as not quite living up to the expectations that they have for themselves? Is it boredom, that the class isn't engaging? Is it disorganization? They misplaced the time. They forgot to hit send on the assignment. That's going to be so crucial this year. Is it confusion about expectations? The teacher expected X and the student turned in Y. And with all of these, it's important to know it could be a combination of one or multiple factors that combine in this way. So Beth, what do we do?
We go to Jane.
Well, yeah.
We go to Jane.
I'll take this. And again, the idea is to ask guiding questions that are going to get our kids to help generate solutions. And by modeling that process, we are going to help them learn to do it without us, right? Which is the ultimate goal. So if we're talking about this situation with missing assignments or God forbid missing classes, and everybody I know last spring dealt with this to one degree or another, we have to suss out what the cause is, right? So we may discover that they feel at sea with organizing their own time and responsibilities, right? Maybe they're not turning stuff in because they don't know how to build a schedule, right? So we may end up modeling how to build a schedule, how to prioritize, how to help them set reminders on the phone, especially if, as Beth suggested before, they're used to bells driving their movement from one place to another. We may, and this is super common with high ability kids, discover that they feel just disconnected and unmotivated. In a gifted child, the perfectionism highlighted in that first scenario is, as I said, the opposite symptom of the underachievement that can lie behind boredom as well. Both symptoms, though, are rooted in expectations, right? The expectations of parents, of teachers, even self-expectations. So the perfectionism and the underachievement are coping mechanisms for dealing with expectations. So again, just keep in mind that for a kid who is being used to labeled smart, gifted, talented, high ability, whatever, they may find it easier to shut down and not perform at all than risk being wrong. Because again, if you don't try, you can't fail. A conversation about why things aren't getting done may lead to a hyperbolic rant about how incompetent the teacher is and how much the teacher hates them. We have to remember how important a teacher-student relationship is. For any child, yes, but especially for high ability children who really prize the attention and the positive feedback from the adults in their educational lives. They have to feel respected, and they have to feel known, and building that teacher-student relationship in a remote environment where verbal cues and body language can't be read and understood in the same way can create some real challenges. So if the student is needing more interaction, they need to let the teacher know, which can feel hard, right? So, and again, this comes back to modeling. So perhaps sharing a time where you have needed to advocate for your own needs, perhaps with a boss, can help your child see that as a grown-up skill rather than as a kind of failure, because they don't tend to see asking for help as a grown-up skill. So when they lapse into a rant, push for concrete examples that take them from the example to some clarity about the conclusion. For example, Mrs. Roth cut me off in a Zoom meeting when I was expounding upon the the origin of celery farming in the middle of Algebra 1 class. Well, what was your goal? What was your teacher's goal? How might you have shared this desire to communicate everything you know about celery farming in a way that accomplishes both your goals? What medium is best for accomplishing that goal? Ask her to chat later, email her. But again, some of this can come down to the desire to interact with adults who care to hear what they know. Okay, we can move on to the last scenario.
To respect your time, we wanted to provide one other scenario, and I think this one's important given the current environment where technology is necessary for learning and it's a connection to the world and it can provide a distraction. All of that is true. So scenario 3, the student comes up with a schedule, but then stays up late playing a game, Minecraft, Fortnite, pick your favorite of the day. Well, it's important to know that students are still learning the use of tech. So is this an appropriate use of technology issue? It's also important to know that social life has been disrupted. And so it can mix together connection with other students, with their peers, replacing a friend group that might look like playing a game too late. And it's not the case that we can just be away from the technology. In fact, I think this year the boundaries are going to be even more unclear than they were in the past. There's time for homework, there's time for gaming, there's time for television, whatever the situation might be, that's going to be unclear as they all kind of mix together. And additionally, as we have less routine, it's more difficult to plan for that. And in this scenario, what's interesting is that the student did try and create a strategy. That means there's something there to work with. There was an intent. And it's not always, we are going to mess up. We are going to make mistakes. And it's important to know that there was an intent here. And it might not always be perfect and may not always end well. So what do we do in this situation?
As Matt has mentioned, our immediate reaction is off the table. We can't take away their games because that's taking away their homework and also taking away their social life. So one of the things that can be useful here is to talk through your child's decision-making process as they stayed up later and later and later, with questions that are pointing them to specific choices they made. This means that you have to push through the, I don't know why I did that, but it gets them to recognize moments where they made a decision. And then together you can agree on consequences and discuss how to make better choices the next time. Maybe something like agreeing on a bedtime, again, setting alarms to remind the student of it. But by treating them as a partner in the process, you're going to model for them and teach them self-reflection and self-assessment. And as a parent, I really like this one. They can't focus their disappointment at the consequences on you, but it redirects their disappointment to the behaviors themselves. And I think that another piece of this is letting them know the ways you learned to manage your time. Letting them know, you know what, sometimes I get sucked into a book and I stay up too late, and then I have to figure out how to fix it the next day. And so showing them times that you've mismanaged it lets them see a growth process, not just something that they're magically supposed to know.
So when is any of this going to feel easier, right? The big money question. You know, it's going to come down to practice, right? Our practice using the strategies that have been described, ask, clarify, help reframe, and our children's practice at, you know, as Beth said, partnering with us in these conversations and in the decisions that need to be made when they inevitably screw up. Part of a teacher's job at our level, at the secondary level, we believe, is to start to let go and allow the children to be responsible, right? That's how we make them responsible. Building opportunities for growth means building opportunities for failure, right? And that is a fundamental part of the teacher-student relationship. And that's easy because there's more distance in the student-teacher relationship. Our level of tolerance for your child's you know, ability to fall and pick himself back up might feel higher than your tolerance for that. But I would argue that it is just as fundamental a part of the parent-child relationship. And as a mother of 3 girls, I know it is the most agonizing part of parenting to see your child feel hurt or confused or unsuccessful. I would argue that if we really reflect on the moments that strengthened us, we can see the seeds of our successes in some failures, right? It's a banal example, but you know, we pulled that all-nighter and then learned that that planning a project out in advance really pays off. So let's accept now that this year ahead of us is not going to be easy for anyone, but we can shape our actions to start to alleviate some of the anxieties of this year and to help our kids build those all-important skills of independence and resilience and communication, skills that they're going to need their whole lives. Thanks.
Well, everyone, looking at the time, it's not surprising that we have, 3 educators that went a little over on their areas of expertise and topics that they're incredibly passionate about. What I'm going to do as the moderator is pop out of this format in the screen share, and we're going to reappear as the Brady Bunch floating heads. If you have a question, I encourage you to please type it into chat, and I will do my best to direct those questions to our panelists. So one moment here.
It does look like we have a question here. Are there any books or resources to help learn the techniques?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I would say it's probably most helpful if when we post the slide deck for this, we can add some resources at the end. Gifted Child Today is a great publication with timely articles. We can certainly add some sort of longer books and books that I think deal with some gender specific issues too. So get those put in there.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Jane. The entire presentation, both the recording of today's webinar, as well as a PDF of the slide deck, will be available at stlouismagazine.com.
I saw another question about tips for encouraging social connections with other students. So go ahead, Beth.
Oh, one thing that worked for us last spring, which was sort of I happen to be teaching Shakespeare, and I like it when students read Shakespeare aloud, but particularly at the 9th grade level, just because it really helps them understand it. And so I suggested that students form groups and read aloud, and I dropped in on a few of them, and students kept sort of meeting to do little study groups through Zoom, and that it was really interesting. A couple of our students said that having Zoom open while they were working on paper on the desk, just having somebody else on the other end, the way they sit together at the tables in our school, really sort of gave them that sense that there was someone else there so that they could just pop up and ask a question. And so looking at things like virtual study groups can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the less official seems to be really better as well. So it's not a dinner time to work together. It's just getting more comfortable opening the Zoom or FaceTime or whatever, just to make that connection and encouraging that. At first, it might be helpful to set some sort of routine, but then knowing that, oh, it's dinner time. Let me pop on so that I can be with these 3 other people, and maybe all of them show up, maybe one of them, but there still is something there that helps to encourage that social connection. That's another thing that we saw organically develop last spring with at our school. We had a middle school lunch group that would meet regularly, and knowing our students actually invited and then disinvited some teachers over that time as well, which was great that they self-advocated for what they needed.
I think it's also important to remember sort of the ways that students are connecting that are not the way I remember connecting with my friends. So a lot of the technology enables sort of connections that maybe feel weirder to us than they do to the students. I mean, I know that I have sat in my office with students at school when we were all allowed to be there, and they were texting each other or using some app that I don't even know the name of, maybe to avoid me, but then they were reading them to me. So I think that there just is a greater technological in with students today.
I love this comment we just received in the chat. Planning to move our son into our home office with my husband and me. Just the physical proximity of your child being in the room with 2 other humans in person. That's a great idea. One more question quickly. How can we encourage students to stay focused when on group study Zooms?
That's a great question, Lori. I find myself thinking back to what Beth said when we were talking about that Minecraft scenario, right? I mean, we can gauge how seriously they're, I don't know, how much they're doing math together versus, talking about what they're going to wear the next day or something. And, I think sometimes conversations outside the moment. I know that my tendency has sometimes been to snap in the moment, right? And then I've had an emotional response the teenager has had an emotional response, and we're not going to get anywhere when, you know, we're both up here. So, you know, perhaps letting it go in the moment, and then at another time when there's sort of less emotional charge in the room, you know, say, talk to me about how much time you feel you were spending socializing, which is important, and you validate that need for them, versus doing your math homework. And, you know, so maybe we, timers, I think, are a hugely helpful thing to use, right? Maybe you spend, you know, whatever your child's attention span is, 20 minutes on your, you know, on your math together. The timer goes off, spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about something else. And then if you need to get back to math, get back to math. But again, sort of involving them in the conversation about what their behaviors are, rather than just observing, telling, and I don't know, hope that helps.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. We've reached the end of our time. Again, St. Louis Magazine will post both this video recording as well as a PDF of our slide on their website that should be available at some point later today. I thank you all for tuning in on what was hopefully a beneficial lunch break. Thank you to my colleagues at Thomas Jefferson School. We really appreciate your time. And we wish all of you parents really the best of luck as you muddle through what will continue to be a series of changes this fall. So thank you all. Bye.